Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey people, today we're going to take a look at the Dreamlands expansion for Eldritch Horror from Fantasy Flight Games. This is their newest big box expansion. There were other expansions that were in this little smaller box that don't have quite as much content, or at least really game-changing content. This is not one of those. The other ones were Mountains of Madness and Under the Pyramids. Of course, it requires the original Eldritch Horror basic game to play, and most of the stuff that's in the box is just shuffling into the decks, new little story, thematic bits about like the dream world and people not just succumbing to madness, as if that's not bad enough, but also falling asleep, and Freddy Krueger seems like a pleasant experience at that point. But there are things in the box that are much more significant to the gameplay, an entire other board, new ancient ones that break the game in different ways, and of course a bunch of new investigators, 8 of them to be precise. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an overview of the components. I'm going to skip a lot of the stuff that is, again, just existing stuff, the new versions of existing stuff you just shuffle into the decks. I'm just going to cover the most important gameplay differences that this one brings to the table. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. The Dreamlands is the newest big box expansion for Eldritch Horror. You need the base game to play, but you do not need any other expansions. This is an overview of all of the components that come with the game, in addition to a brand new sideboard that attaches to the main board. But for the sake of brevity and to avoid little bits of story spoilers, I'll skip talking at length about any content that is just add-ons to the original content of the game, unless it's notable. As you can see here, there are new encounters, assets, artifacts, and mythos cards to be added to all of their respective decks, and new spells and conditions, most of which are the same as the old ones, but with different effects on the back of the cards. There are several new regular monsters and epic monsters, one of which represents one of the new ancient ones you'll be fighting. The focus mechanism is back in the expansion. Focus tokens can be gained by spending actions and will allow you to reroll 1 die in the future. There are 8 investigators, new to Eldritch Horror, though familiar to the other Arkhamverse games. There aren't a lot of particularly notable aspects of them, except for Carolyn and Vincent, who can remove madness and injury-illness conditions, respectively, which is incredibly helpful. There are some aspects of the Dreamlands expansion that are new features compared to the base game, but that have actually been used in the other expansions already. For instance, there are prelude cards, one of which you'll either choose or draw randomly at the start of the game. These are story bits that will adjust the game, either with a persistent effect or a one-time gain or loss, or both, of resources at the start of the game. Some prelude cards behave differently depending on which ancient one you're using. One of the preludes, Otherworldly Dreams, lets you use the adventure cards. Other versions of these are in previous expansions, and they basically give you new story-driven encounters to pursue by following the adventure token around the map. Completing these adventures can give you mystery advancements, assets, artifacts, etc. Through preludes, you can also introduce the Dreamlands sideboard to the game. This is an entirely new area for your investigators to traverse, with gates and clues for it that will get added to the other gates and clues. Some of the new monsters are set aside for special circumstances. You'll also spawn the new dream portals. Randomly flip over 3 gates for the real world, and that will tell you where to spawn the dream portals. You can then move your investigators through them to get to the specific indicated space on the Dreamlands board. Also, if a gate would spawn on a location with a dream portal, the gate instead gets placed in the Dreamlands location it links to instead. Alternatively, when you rest in the real world, you can test Will -1 or spend a clue to immediately teleport to the enchanted wood space of the Dreamlands. There's a new deck of location encounters specific to the Dreamlands, as well as the Dream Quest deck, which functions like the Expedition deck from the original game. Whatever Dreamlands location is on the top card of the deck gets the quest token, and you can have an encounter with it, which is usually much more difficult than normal encounters and will have multiple tests, but will usually get you something good. And of course, the most interesting thing about any Eldritch Horror expansions are the ancient ones. There are 2 here. Each of them has their standard mystery and research decks. Hypnos also has 3 additional small special encounter decks, which you will have to resolve with certain mysteries. Atlach-Nacha is the more straightforward of the ancient ones. It will drop gates every time there's a reckoning. If it wakes up, it will spawn on the map and you'll have to murder it while it continues plopping down gates and placing Eldritch tokens on them as a countdown to defeat. Hypnos is the more involved and interesting of the two Ancient Ones, and requires setting up the Dreamlands board. Every reckoning will draw the investigators towards a dream portal, and he forces you to choose either health or sanity to heal during a rest, but not both. His cultists are also interesting. Passing the will test against them will defeat them, but if you fail and have to physically fight them, they will give you a madness condition. If he wakes up, Hypnos will need to be defeated by having encounters through one of his special encounter decks. That is the Eldritch Horror Dreamlands expansion. Well, not to beat around the bush, I like the Dreamlands expansion quite a bit. I like it because it's very straightforward. There's been 2 other expansions, and I like both of them as well. I like Under the Pyramid is probably the least of the 3 big boxes, just because, I don't know, I didn't like the Ancient Ones that much. I didn't like another form of negative consequence for the players with the impairment tokens, but it wasn't that big a deal. It was still a good box set. I still think I might like Mountains of Madness, the first one, a little bit more, only because I felt that the sideboard there, which was Antarctica and you filing like the Lost City and all that stuff, felt more dynamic to me. That might just be my perception. Maybe I liked the theme a little bit better of going on an Arctic expedition than just going to like a dreamscape, which is true. But I also felt there was more thematic stuff and mechanical stuff going on in that game as well. But it's not a huge difference. Dreamlands works because I think it's a lot less complicated than those other expansions. Not a lot less, but significant. I noticed a significant difference in how straightforward this one was. And you don't get too bogged down in any additional rules to have to learn. Another board, you can travel to it. There's a new deck of cards that you can have, or 2 new decks of cards technically, you can have encounters with. One of them being the special one that's kind of like an expedition deck, the Dream Quests. And traveling to and from is rather easy. But that's fine. You know, what this game always needs the most of is more variety of how to play. And now, I have a very warped perception of this because I have every expansion. I will never lack for content for Eldritch Horror. But if someone is newer to Eldritch Horror, has the base game, enjoys it, wants more content, I might point the Dreamlands expansion to them first, or point them towards the Dreamlands expansion as proper English, because I think, again, it's more straightforward than the other ones. The 2 Ancient Ones, which I think they're the draw, right? That's the thing that you're most interested in when you get a new expansion because of what their game effects are going to be and what weird thematic ways and impact that they have on the game. I think they're both actually pretty interesting, and that's not always the case. Usually there's one that is and one that isn't. But I like the idea of the, I guess, weaker, but again, just more straightforward than the other one, if I can keep using that word. Atlaknaya, as if I can, I'm sure someone will correct my pronunciation even for that. But she, or it, is very interesting because it's dropping gates all over the place, which is, in and of itself is inherently dangerous. But the fact that even if she wakes up, which is even more likely because of the amount of gates that are on the board, then they're a game-ending condition. It just gets awful and awful, and it's another one of the Ancient Ones that has a physical manifestation that will pop out, which can be incredibly deadly and scary, but it can also be fun. One of my favorite experiences with Eldritch Horror was someone slaying Cthulhu when Cthulhu actually came down to Earth, and we had to take him out because we had like this. Essentially, one of our investigators became a fantasy paladin with a giant flaming sword and mystical artifacts and just went and killed him. So I like that one. Now, the other one that comes in the box is Hypnos, which is the main, I think, draw of the game, because when you play with Hypnos, you must play with the Dreamlands sideboard, which is not the only way that you can play with that board, but it's the most direct way, and I think the most interesting one. Definitely hard. The fact that I think you start with more potential doom to lose, but you can't rest as well as you used to, which sucks. You would think like, oh, what's the big deal? I just can't get health and sanity at the same time. That's a big deal when it can be very difficult to come by healing of any type in this game. But then there's also the way that the cultists change, which makes madness a much more ever-present threat, where you can, if you pass the will test against them, they're defeated. If you don't, and it gets to the physical test, even if you win that, you're going to potentially go crazy with a madness condition, which seems much more difficult to deal with in this game. And Hypnos is also one of the more complicated ancient ones because he has the separate small decks of special encounter cards that must be taken care of as part of the mysteries that comes with him, which I actually like. I love anything that adds more story blurbs and reading off the cards to this game. I know there's some people I play with who hate that. I still enjoy it, and this game, this expansion in particular, gives it to you in spades. So that was enjoyable to me. I like the new investigators. I don't think that they're great. Like, I remember in the last expansion for this, which I believe was the Sign of a Carcosa, I really love the investigators that came in that one. Now, this one gives you more. You get 8 investigators in this box. They're just not terribly memorable, but they do add new types of abilities. The 2 that I like the most are the ones that can remove one of them. I think it's Carolyn. I might mix which one does what, but Carolyn, I believe, can remove madness, and Vincent, I think, can remove illnesses and injuries, which is like, okay, what's the big deal? That's a huge deal in this game. And so the very fact that they're there makes getting the investigators from this set well worthwhile. If you have played no other big box expansion of this game, it introduces the focus tokens, which is a great concept that I should have been in the base game as far as I'm concerned, because it gives you another thing to do on your turn that will set you up for better turns in the future, getting a token that lets you re-roll. And there's also a few cards, I didn't mention this in the overview because I didn't know how omnipresent it is in the game, but there's at least a few cards that say you can use your focus tokens for something different. Like, if you have a focus token, you can spend it to do this, but if you don't, you're screwed. So you should always try to stock up on them, and I really like that. The adventures are back. Like those a lot. Again, more thematic elements, more story elements. They're not necessarily going to win you the game, but you can count on getting some good stuff, advancing the mystery at least one step, getting some cool artifacts, which is always a great feeling, getting really cool, powerful items. And there's more of those in this set as well. So, and also new prelude cards. Again, not totally game-breaking and changing, but having different ways to set up the game and also different drives thematically in the game is always a big help. So, really good set. I don't think it's going to change anyone's mind if you don't already like Eldritch Horror, because again, most of it is just more of the same, but more variety. But for those of you who already like Eldritch Horror, I think this is a good set to start off with. I think for people who have already been collecting this game and all the expansions, it's not one that you should just automatically skip out of hand, like, oh, I've got enough stuff. Maybe you do. I mean, I'm a collector, of course, but hoarder. But I think that this is definitely well worth your time as well. At least as good as the other big box expansions, and in some ways better. That is the Dreamlands expansion for Eldritch Horror. I highly recommend it.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.